Missouri Western State University has experienced many challenges over the past 2 years. In this week's Community Conversation, Charles Christian sits down with University President Dr. Elizabeth Kennedy. Charles.
All right, Dr. Kennedy, thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so very pleased to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here, and we know there have been many challenges in your new tenure and over the last couple of years, not just some of the economic challenges, but COVID-19 as well. What were some of the most difficult parts of your transition, and what were some of the most rewarding?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail with the difficult pieces. The pandemic was certainly something that we weren't prepared for, in the sense of who can ever predict that a pandemic is going to happen.
Right.
And I think the hardest part of that was dealing with the ambiguity, not knowing what would happen, when would it happen. But we were very fortunate at Missouri Western. We put together a very expert COVID response team, and we had a cross-campus group that actually worked together very well to keep our campus safe, operational, keep our students healthy, our faculty and staff healthy. So that it was a challenge, but if you think about it, even at the beginning of this school year, we were dealing with the Delta and then the Omicron coming in and not knowing what that would look like for us. But fortunately, COVID is pretty much dissipated on our campus. We still have self-reporting, we still have our coordinator, but we're not wearing masks, we're not dealing with that kind of ambiguity. And what's really exciting, particularly for spring, is the campus has come back. The vibrancy is there, and internally with our students and their activities and our engagements, but also externally. We're seeing a lot of groups come back to our campus, elementary school students, businesses that have events on campus. And having been in higher education, next fall it will be 26 years.
Oh my.
26 years, but having a campus vibrant with people doing, engaged and participating is one of the most rewarding experiences that I can have.
Oh, that's great. And we've kind of gotten to watch just right across town the big changes that have happened. The biggest besides COVID is probably just the moving out of sort of the economic red zone or emergency zone.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I had arrived on campus in January of 2020, and it was just prior to the pandemic that the university was dealing with some very significant critical financial issues. And we went through a very difficult period of retrenchment, of reduction in force, elimination of programs. And as a faculty member who spent 17 years in the classroom, I completely understand that pain and that grief and loss. But I think we were doing what we needed to do, and it was really based on our students, the student demand. One of the things you notice in higher education is that students vote with their feet. And so we were looking at programs where we either didn't have a lot of students enrolled or we weren't graduating them. And that was majors, that was minors. So we went through that process, and in addition to that, we really started to, what I think of as, live within our means. Here's our financial budget, here's our revenues, and how do we get the best processes in place to make sure it's like your family budget.
Sure.
You get your income, and you have to make sure that that's living within your means. So coming out of that, when the board unanimously approved that we were in a strong enough place to lift that financial emergency, I think that's really the turning point. There's so many good things going on at Missouri Western, whether we're talking about new programs that are in demand, hiring new faculty for those programs, growing our programs that are strong, but putting checks and balances in place so that we can continue to grow, prosper, provide the degree programs that our students are interested in, but really do a strong pivot for workforce development, making sure that we're producing graduates who are entering the workforce, going into careers that are in demand in our region.
Speaking of that, that's a great point, and I want to piggyback off of that a little bit and ask you what are now the key majors? I know that arts and music kind of took a tumble there a bit in some of the cutbacks, but I also know that there are other programs that you've mentioned that you've added faculty, that you've added emphasis to. So talk about that balance. Which programs now do you think are sort of leading the way?
Right. Well, obviously our strongest programs right now are in our nursing.
Okay.
And when we look at our incoming freshmen and we poll them on what majors they're interested in, nursing by far and away, it's a very strong program. We have wonderful partnerships with Mosaic. Our nursing simulation lab is state of the art. It is definitely high fidelity technology, and that's a career that is in demand. We built a new respiratory therapy program. It's a 4-year program, also very strong in demand, even before the pandemic. And so we'll be bringing in students to start that program for the first time in the fall. Again, in partnership with Mosaic, they've been very good supporters of what we're doing. Education is another program where we have a lot of student demand, particularly early elementary education, which is probably music to a lot of our educators and administrators in the region, because we know that there's a teacher shortage, and so we're looking to supply that. Criminal justice is another area of growth for us. Psychology, in fact, we've just created a new micro-credential, which means a 1-year certificate that will give you an opportunity to move into the workforce. So if you think about mental health needs in our community, this would be a credential for someone who wants to begin at an entry-level position. But psychology is a growing area for us. Business, of course, is always strong as well, accounting, management, marketing. So I'm very pleased, because despite the cuts, what we're seeing is for our freshman class coming in, we have significantly about 600 more students who applied to the university this fall than applied at the same time last year. And we look at the number of students who have committed to the university, who've signed up for Griffin Orientation, which June will be Griffin Orientation Month. Those numbers are showing good increase. And to me, that suggests that the pivot we made into more of these types of degree programs is what the students are looking for.
Well, it sounds like, too, as you mentioned, the needs in the community are also dictating that a bit. How much of that interaction with, say, school administrators or law enforcement, both of which have certainly have needs in regard to employment, how did that factor into this conversation?
Well, for example, we have a law enforcement academy, which we revamped, and the city was very generous with us. They give us about $450,000 for improvements out of the ARPA funding for that. Part of that was for equipment, upgrades, simulators, and those kinds of things, but also part of that was to provide training grants for cadets. You've heard about law enforcement, so we work very closely with the Buchanan Sheriff's Department as well as the city's police department, so that we're graduating cadets who are law enforcement ready, ready for that. And I think at the end of this academic year, we had a fall class and a spring class. We will have graduated about 35 cadets, which is significantly more than we've done in the past. And I know the needs are there for the city, but we're working together to partner to provide that.
That's wonderful. Well, got to ask you about tuition. Tuition increases. Everybody's talking about that lately. I know you guys are having meetings about that sort of, maybe you already have.
Yes.
Yes. Any updates on that for us?
Well, so we met actually today with our Board of Governors to discuss the budget, and part of the budget are the tuition and fees increases. And being very mindful of the fact that our tuition is already one of the lowest in the states. We actually rank at the bottom 3 in terms of tuition for a public university. But the reality is our utilities are going up. Our insurance coverage, the Mosers, we have our own cost of doing business increases. So we did a modest 4% increase in tuition. It translates into about a $10 increase per credit hour. So we worked really very hard to make sure that the increases that we're doing are still keeping us in that affordability range. And that's one of the key pieces about Missouri Western, is the quality education you get for the tuition that you're paying. Quality is very much higher than the cost of that.
Great. Well, finally, what are some of your hopes for the next couple of years as hopefully the trends continue in a positive direction that you're describing? What are your hopes, and how long do you hope to be leading this university? I don't want to.
Oh boy, that's a question, Charles. Well, so I was just thinking before we started chatting. I have been here in St. Joseph for 2 years and about 5 months, and having grown up in Kansas City, I really love being in this community. I have been able to become part of different kinds of boards. I'm a member of my neighborhood association, which I'm very proud of, and I love being in the city, and I love the different parts and the different activities. So I feel like I'm home. And when I look at the future of Missouri Western, I'm so encouraged. We have phenomenal students and phenomenal faculty, and our staff. Everyone is so dedicated to the success of our students. And I think with the creativity and the new programs, the new initiatives that we're engaged in, I see nothing but a bright future for Missouri Western. It is a gem, and I think the more we can promote that and talk about that, and it's so also so gratifying to get such strong support from the city, from the county, from the residents, from our state elected officials, federal officials. You know, there's such a recognition of not only the importance of the university to the community, but the community to the university.
Very
it's
good.
a reciprocal relationship.
Well, that's good to hear, and thank you. Special thanks, Dr. Elizabeth Kennedy, President of Missouri Western, for joining us today. We'll have more community conversations next week, and we'll have more news after the break.